This is a new video from IGN, the kings of internet gaming discourse, of course. And in this, it is called the Duskbloods. Yes, it's multiplayer, but have some faith. Are there any faith in Miyazaki-san? And I'm interested in hearing the argumentation because my perspective is the Duskbloods looks interesting. You know, I'm paying attention to it, but I still feel somewhat disappointed. You know, it'll still probably be good. Miyazaki's directing it, but I am frustrated that after the wild success of Elden Ring, they have like walked away from that, at least temporarily, and are doing these multiplayer projects like Night Rain. And I understand some people love Night Rain, Elden Ring Night Rain. That's fine. I played it and it literally was everything I liked about Elden Ring was stripped out because it's a multiplayer game. And so it's based on these tight rounds. It's based on going through these set bosses. It's based on some stuff changing dynamically, sure, but there's no character build customization. You just level up flat. It's a roguelite basically. And that's just not what I liked about Elden Ring. So all the stuff I loved about Elden Ring, the character customization, creating builds, the really tough bosses you might break your head against for hours and hours on end, that's just gone. And instead you have something else. You might love what they've replaced it with, but it's something else. So for me, it's just disappointing. And then seeing the Duskbloods revealed, it was like, oh, so the Night Rain was just practice for this. That's what it was. So for me, it's kind of disappointing. Doesn't mean it's going to be bad, but for me, it's disappointing. It's disappointing. But let's hear what they have to say. And if they're going to, I think that it's going to be in you know, a constructive argument and video. I will agree. Somebody in chat said that they thought the title felt a little condescending. I could see that. I'm optimistic though. Let's see if they can convince us.
A lot of Bloodborne fans, I completely lost my shit when the Duskbloods was first revealed in the most recent Nintendo Direct. From the first frames of a gaunt, puffy-shirted invalid slumped in a mahogany chair under the light of the full moon.
Invalid? It seems a little harsh. You see one picture of him and you're like, ah, an invalid. You're like, oh, that really escalated quickly.
To the gothic skylines of Yarnum-esque spires and steeples, to a clerically bestial boss with mangy lupine features and one huge arm, the Duskbloods wears its Bloodborne influences on its sleeve like a vampiric sigil carved into pale Victorian flesh. After a decade of fan outcry, FromSoft is finally giving fans what looks to be a spiritual successor to the beloved 2015 PS4 exclusive widely lauded as one of the best games ever made. But unfortunately for some, the operative word here is looks. After finding out what the Duskbloods actually is, my excitement began to diminish faster than my health bar in a poison swamp. Unlike Bloodborne, an action RPG, the Duskbloods is clearly labeled as a multiplayer action game. The official messaging on FromSoftware's Japanese site describes it as a PvPvE title with online multiplayer at its core, in which up to 8 players will fight among themselves and against challenging foes. Looking at the various reactions around the internet, it's clear that I'm not the only FromSoft fan who was disappointed by this news.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, which is why I think they kind of buried that a little bit. For one, I think the reason why Nintendo pushed for this is because it's going to help them bolster Nintendo online memberships, because it will require an online membership in order to play. So I think that's part of the reason why they pushed for it. Secondly, yeah, it's an 8-player PvPvE game. It's not exactly clear what the structure is, but this very well could be like their own version of an extraction game. It could be that type of thing with progression tied to what you extract with, or it might just be like a sort of mini battle royale where you're just trying to survive long enough to get out. I don't know. We don't know for sure. But either way, it will not play like Bloodborne at all. It just won't. Doesn't mean it's bad necessarily, but it's going to be very, very different. Ragnarok Aftershock on Twitch says, I dislike this angle. If you wanted a single player game and you're getting a multiplayer one, you do not need to have faith. It just isn't what you want. And that's final. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's if you wanted Bloodborne 2, it's okay to be disappointed by this because you're seeing a game that is reminiscent of that. But that's just not what it is. And I can absolutely understand the frustration. And for me, it also just doesn't seem to be something that I'm particularly interested in. at least based on what we know about it right now. Maybe Mr. Max Scoville, maybe. Anyway, maybe he's going to explain why we should be interested in this, because I feel like maybe I'm missing something. But I really have been surprised that the discourse around the game has pretty much immediately evaporated the moment it was revealed that it's PvPvE and it's like 8-player, requires online connectivity. Like, the excitement pretty much immediately died out, which I think is interesting. I'm Lazy Luke. Thank you for the sub. Thank you.
Justice isn't fair.
But I thought about this and I realized something. As much as I'm not interested in a multiplayer action game that kind of looks like Bloodborne, the Duskbloods is still something worth getting excited about. It's a completely new project directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki. His track record speaks for itself, and he's the whole reason that we have the Soulsborne genre in the first place, because he was willing to try something new. So even though I'm skeptical, I think it's worth giving him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll tell you why. In a Creator's Voice blog post on the official Nintendo site, Miyazaki went into more detail. There are over a dozen characters for the player to choose from, each with their own identity and appearance, he explained.
Okay.
The game has a so-called hub area where players can choose their character, customize them, and enter online multiplayer. Upon concluding an online match, players then return to the hub, at which point they receive some sort of reward, whether they win or lose. Using these
Win or lose being, I think, being the last one standing against the other players.
rewards, players can further customize their character, and so the cycle continues. If that was all we had to go on, I would write this game off entirely because it sounds like yet another hero shooter shaped cash grab. Lots of people love multiplayer games. That's why they keep making them, which is great, except when publishers bank everything on live service projects thinking they've got the next Fortnite or Call of Duty on their hands, and then pull the plug, take the game offline, and lay everyone off after they discover the target demographic is still just playing Fortnite or Call of Duty. Thankfully, the Duskbloods doesn't sound like it's just checking boxes, but rather thinking outside of them. In the same blog post, Miyazaki elaborated on what makes the Duskbloods unique, stating that online matches are generally last player standing, but there are certain cases where victory conditions differ, like a powerful boss enemy suddenly appearing, forcing everyone to put their differences aside to kill it. Furthermore, players will have their own roles, which are personal goals separate from the overall victory conditions. For instance, if one player has the destined rival role applied, they are tasked with finding and defeating one specific player. Conversely, there's also a destined companion role in which one player must seek out another player and form a bond with them. So everyone's trying to kill each other except for two people who are trying to be friends? I don't know, sounds kinda interesting. It remains to be seen how this actually functions in-game, but I'm intrigued. It sounds a little bit like the game Werewolf, in which players have varying objectives, but no one's quite sure what everyone else is doing. Miyazaki notes, quote,
Oh yeah, I know what game that is. It's like Midnight Werewolf or something like that. One Night Werewolf. Yeah, this. If you've never played this game, it's really, really interesting. But basically, like, each of the characters have different roles to play. So there's a werewolf in the midst, and you have to figure out who is the werewolf. But then each of them have different things. So like the seer will look at somebody's card. Everybody closes their eyes when the night starts, and the seer has an ability to like look at that card. The doppelganger gets to choose to be somebody else, I think is what it is. It's been a minute since I played. And then, you know, you'll go and there's a mason, there's the insomniac. The insomniac doesn't sleep at night, so gets to perform an extra action. The robber gets to, I think his thing is that he takes somebody else's card. It's very interesting. So there's all sorts of different roles to play, and then there's actually an app tied to it, and you select which characters are in the game at that moment. Game timer, you hit play, and then the app will read off what you do, and it's like, okay, close your eyes, everybody. Seer, open your eyes, because they have to go in a particular order, because some characters will swap character cards, some will lie about what they have, or whatever else. It's very interesting. But yeah, that could be interesting. I get that reference. I know that game.
I personally am not much of a PvP person, and I wanted to make something that's satisfying even for players like me. And this right here is music to my ears because I am the same way. A lot of people play Fortnite for the straightforward competition, but I always had a good time just scampering around the map trying to do the secondary objectives while avoiding getting murdered by roving bands of 10-year-olds. It sounds kind of like there'll be various ways to score victory points in the Duskbloods aside from just killing everyone else, and Miyazaki notes that some players may prefer to earn points by avoiding direct combat and instead engaging in more opportunistic behavior. How you earn points is entirely up to you. Interesting. FromSoft's action RPGs are primarily single-player experiences, but dating back to Demon's Souls, they've all had a multiplayer component. Not counting Sekiro, but that's also not an RPG. Interacting with other players has largely been optional, buried in comically obtuse matchmaking systems that involve ringing dainty little bells and performing ambiguous rituals with someone else's amputated fingers or enchanted jewelry. One of FromSoft's best qualities is how their games let players figure, or finger, things out for themselves, and while it's immensely rewarding in terms of lore and exploration, it can get a little tedious when you're just trying to connect with other players. Summoning another player online to help beat a boss may have a stigma among some hardcore players, but it's there for a reason, and helping other players online has always been at the core of FromSoft's action RPGs. In a 2010 interview with Eurogamer, Miyazaki explained the origins of the anonymous co-op in Demon's Souls. His inspiration was the time his car got stuck in the snow at the bottom of a hill, but got over it after the cars behind him gave his car a push, even though he hadn't directly asked them to help. As he poetically described it, you could probably call it a connection of mutual assistance between transient people. Driving home, Miyazaki wondered how he would have gotten along with these anonymous Good Samaritans if they'd met under different circumstances. Would they be friends, or would they fight? The Duskbloods sounds almost like the inverse of this, like if there was an 8-car pileup and everyone got out of their cars to argue, but then 2 of the people realized they went to high school together and were old friends, but then a grizzly bear showed up and everybody put their differences aside to try and scare it off.
I feel like, but can't you say this about like almost every one of these sort of extraction type games or battle royales with PvE elements? Like I feel like we're getting really artsy fartsy to just basically explain that it's a multiplayer game with some world events, you know, like, and we can bring up the RPG stuff, sure, but also, you know, if we're going to be consistent and we're going to be like, okay, look at his past track record, it's been solid. Yeah, with the RPGs, but like also Sekiro was also very good. But with those single player games that he's been very, very involved in, but like Night Rain, which he helped on pre-production for, he's not the director for that one, but he helped on pre-production with it. That also kind of a little more iffy for a lot of people. The Armored Core release was like, I think a solid 8.5 out of 10 for a lot of people. Not quite on the same level as like Elden Ring, for example. I think most people would agree with that. That also was something he did pre-production for, was not the primary game director for though. And so like we can look at just Miyazaki or we can look at FromSoftware as a whole. And, you know, I think if we're starting to get to the point where we look at some specific slices or verticals of, well, the company, yeah, it's had a couple of these more questionable ones that weren't quite as good. But if we look over here, they did some really good stuff. I feel like we just start to cope a little bit. Again, the game could end up being really, really good. But I think people's primary frustration is just that they're like, yeah, Miyazaki's an amazing single player game dev and director, a world-class talent, no doubt. And it's frustrating to see him working on like a live service game. It just is.
In mind, no pun intended, this is rampant speculation about a video game coming out in 2026 based on statements Miyazaki made 15 years ago, so take it with a pinch of spirit ashes, if you will. PvP is a contentious topic among Soulsborne players, and one criticism regularly leveled against it is that it's not properly balanced. And yeah, no FromSoft gives players an immense amount of freedom to craft different builds. For instance, Elden Ring has 414 weapons and 714 pieces of armor, all of which can be upgraded and modified, and all of which scale depending on how you've assigned skill points to one of 10 starting classes across 8 different stats, and that's not even factoring in talismans, runes, items, or whatever else I'm forgetting.
Yeah, but I think the unbalanced stuff player to player works in a game like Elden Ring because while, yeah, you can of course run into other players, primarily the game is about fighting the bosses. And if the player is able to come up with a way to break the game and like figure out a way to overcome the boss or even like take advantage of a weakness or some exploit, it works for a game like Elden Ring. It feels cool that the player is kind of cheesing the boss at that point. But I just think once you get into the realm of PvP and co-op stuff, it definitely does become a problem. But that's been an age-old problem in these games, is like if you're not using the meta build, you're just not competitive in the co-op stuff or in the PvP stuff. Again, like if we're going to be consistent and look at past performance, this has been a problem. Night Rain doesn't run into it because players aren't fighting each other, they're working together. Do you really think like they'll master balance this time around? Maybe.
If you can do the math to min-max a lightning perfume bottle profit build, you can probably run the numbers on how much time and money it would take to fine-tune Elden Ring's PvP enough to make everyone happy. The Duskbloods will have some degree of character customization, but that's the customization of a handful of pre-made characters. The fact that the game is described as action and not action RPG suggests to me that figuring out what your character can do will be a lot more streamlining than futzing around with granular upgrades in a big spreadsheet. It's worth
I could be wrong. As far as I've seen so far, it could just also be translation issues, but all of the verbiage I've heard them use with regard to the Duskbloods is like character customization. They haven't really discussed builds or swapping out armor pieces or weapons and that type of thing. From my perspective, what they've described could also literally just mean cosmetic stuff. And like grinding out rounds and rounds of this just for cosmetic upgrades might be cool. But I think... yeah, you shouldn't go into this expecting like any sort of ARPG anything.
Worth pointing out that Elden Ring Night Rain's player progression has been streamlined in a similar fashion, with stat points being automatically allocated. It might be constricting for some fans of build crafting, but it means that players can get into the action faster, and FromSoft has less variables to account for in order to create a balanced experience. It's hard to talk about the Duskbloods without talking about Elden Ring Night Rain, and that's tricky since Night Rain hasn't actually come out yet. Still, a lot of people have formed opinions based on a recent network test, and what's been shown is likely indicative of Night Rain's basic gameplay loop, but it's not fair to assume that the Duskbloods will follow suit just because it's a multiplayer game. In fact, the messaging kinda got buried, but Night Rain isn't entirely a multiplayer game by default. The network test was just there to test that aspect of it, but supposedly Night Rain can be played solo, which I imagine will sit a lot better with a lot of folks.
My understanding is it's played solo where you don't have a party. They're considering adding duos because as of right now, it's only for like single player or it's 3-player. But it's still going to be like an online game. It's still the same game functionally.
After all, even when you summon other players for co-op in Elden Ring, a lot of them insist on playing solo. The fact that Night Rain is connected to Elden Ring and not an entirely new property is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, Elden Ring sold almost 30 million copies, so you can't really fault Bandai Namco for wanting to cash in a bit on name brand recognition. At the same time, familiarity breeds contempt, and while there's definitely some new stuff showing up in Night Rain, there are also a lot of recycled elements and systems. That means less of a lift for the devs and less of a learning curve for returning players, but it also doesn't have that same new car smell or sense of mystery. Seeing a post-launch roguelike remix of a popular game as DLC is pretty common these days. God of War Ragnarok, The Last of Us Part 2, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Far Cry 6, Hitman World of Assassination, and even Splatoon 3 have all gotten modes that chop up their mechanics and systems and enemies into a randomized roguelike format.
Almost all of them do not charge $40 for it though. Some of them even include it for free, you know? So I think the standards are different.
It's sort of like taking a bunch of Thanksgiving leftovers and making a casserole once you've exhausted all the conventional meal configurations involving turkey, stuffing, and mashed potatoes. And I don't mean that as a slight against roguelikes or casseroles, it's a creative reuse of stuff you got lying around.
Let us eat.
To circle back to my original point, giving the Duskbloods a chance because Miyazaki's in charge, it's worth noting that he's not in charge of Night Rain. That's being directed by Junya Ishizaki, a FromSoft veteran who's been around since the original Dark Souls and acted as battle director for Elden Ring, which is not only an objectively awesome job description, but one that he obviously performed with flying colors. The last time Miyazaki let someone else take the wheel of one of his properties, we got the infamously divisive Dark Souls 2. I don't bring...
Well, also Armored Core. Are we just skipping over Armored Core? Because maybe I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure he didn't direct Armored Core. That was one of the other producers.
This up to throw shade at Night Rain or Mr. Ishizaki, but rather to point out that the reason Miyazaki stepped away was to establish a whole new universe, which was Bloodborne. And now he's stepping away from Elden Ring to work on the Duskbloods.
I give you.
But even this starts to feel like, well, if you don't like Night Rain, don't dismiss the Duskbloods because he's not directing that. It's like, okay. So like, we saying that it's bad? I think like if clearly the sentiment in the video is give the game a chance because Miyazaki is working on it. Okay. I will admit I get a little triggered when I hear somebody say, just have faith. Because as you can probably tell, I think hype can make you stupid. And it makes you vulnerable to getting screwed over by things that were otherwise like clearly red flags. And I don't think you can have faith in something or hope or hype or excitement without or while still maintaining an honestly like critical and skeptical viewpoint on it. At least be like, you know, transparent with it, which I think he is being right now. I think he's saying like, I'm excited for it because Miyazaki's working on it. So, you know, I can understand that. But I think my perspective is right now that as a fan of Miyazaki, I'm still disappointed in the Duskbloods because it's not what like, this is not the type of game that I love from him. Maybe it ends up being a new favorite kind of game. That's very, very possible. But until we've seen it, I don't think there's reason to conclude that this will therefore be that. You know, it's just as much of an assumption to say that the Duskbloods is going to be really good because Miyazaki worked on it, as it is to say the Duskbloods is not going to be for me because it's a live service PvPvE game. Like, you're both sides, you're kind of assuming that either because of format or because of the director, it's going to be good or bad, or for you or not for you. So of course, we're not going to be able to tell until we get gameplay or anything. It's still a year out, probably more. It's probably like a year and a half. It's probably later next year. But I think it's totally fine for people to feel frustrated and even disappointed by their choice to do this. I think a lot of people were hoping that they were either making Bloodborne 2 or they were working on Elden Ring 2 or something. And so to see them having spent all this time working on another live service game, I think it's totally fair feeling disappointed by that. Happy Mero says Miyazaki doing multiplayer is like Scorsese doing a Marvel movie to me. I think that's how it feels. It's a good way of putting it. I think that's how it feels for a lot of people, is it just feels like a lot of talent being squandered on something that nobody asked for. Like, I don't think anybody, if you polled them 3 weeks ago before this reveal and everything, I don't think anybody would answer on a survey, I want FromSoftware to work on another 8-player PvPvE game, exclusive on the Switch. Like, I don't think anybody asked for this. Could still be great. Sometimes when you have a visionary person, they're able to give you something you didn't even know you wanted. And, you know, you end up being blown away by it. I remember watching the old video of the Microsoft executives responding to the announcement of the iPhone and laughing about it uproariously because they're like, it doesn't have a keyboard. No businessman will ever take a phone seriously that doesn't have a keyboard. It's like, it's just glass. You just type on it. Really? Like, they were so cocky about it, but it's because like the market at that point didn't know that they wanted that. They hadn't seen it done well before or done well enough before to convert them. And once it was done well enough, then it became the new trend and everybody moved towards just having, you know, the flat display, no physical tactile keyboard anymore. But it took somebody doing it that well. And maybe the Duskbloods does it that well. Maybe it is just such a phenomenal game that it proves once and for all, okay, he's the GOAT. Maybe. But I think as of right now, it's okay for people to be like, damn it, guys, like, really, this is what we're doing? I think that's fine. And it just shows that they're going to have to do even more to win players over and excite them, because I think most FromSoft fans are probably starting pretty disappointed based on this announcement. Because also remember, a lot of FromSoft fans are playing on main consoles. They're playing on like the PlayStation, Xbox, PC. So this game has to be good enough that not only does it convince them that they should play an 8-player PvPvE game, it also has to be good enough that they are convinced to buy a $450 console and probably an $80 game. And a Nintendo Online subscription. Because all of that's bundled into this. So this needs to be a $600 game for a lot of people. And that raises the bar. That raises the standard. And I think for a lot of like hardcore FromSoft fans who love the ARPG stuff, especially, I don't know, man. It will literally be a tough sell. It would be a tough sell normally, even if it was on PlayStation and Xbox. And I think it's an even harder sell when you factor in console exclusivity, when you factor in all of the other things like the subscription service that they're going to sell you, all of those things. So I can understand what Mr. IGN, I think Max Scoville is his name. Max Scoville. I can understand what he's saying, kind of the argument at the core of the video, but I still think it's totally fine for people to be frustrated, disappointed, and to approach this very skeptically, of course. I don't think you need to be cynical or anything, but I think it's absolutely fine for people to be frustrated by it. I also find it kind of funny that a FromSoft game is exclusive to a console mainly marketed to children. Well, I think that's exactly why they are trying to I think that's exactly why they're trying to get this exclusive, because it's also the online stuff, but I think it's also, it excites them that they could get some more adults on the platform, because the one thing about kids is they don't have jobs. They can't spend as much money as adults. So their hope is that they can get that new sliver of the market, but we'll see.
He took my thing.